Hi, welcome to the AZ Prison Report. My name is John Fabricius. I'm the Executive Director of Arizonans for Transparency and Accountability in Corrections. And in this series, we are going to be discussing our Arizona prison systems from A to Z. And the first place where we're going to want to start is a story that came out Friday. This might be one of the most important stories that's come out in some time regarding the Department of Corrections. Let's take a look at what we're talking about here. This is a story that came out Friday in AZCentral that was written by Jimmy Jenkins, and it's entitled Governor-elect Hobbs to Inherit Troubled Arizona Prison System After 3 Years of Shinn. So let's get into the story and discuss what's going on with the Arizona Department of Corrections that Governor-elect Katie Hobbs is now facing as she has been elected governor of the state of Arizona. So in a recent victory speech, Governor-elect Katie Hobbs pledged to work together with Arizonans to tackle our biggest challenges. While Hobbs did not single out Arizona's prison system, she could be hard-pressed to find a state agency facing more challenges and drawing so many resources from the public coffers than the Arizona Department of Corrections. That is absolutely true. As the prison population continues to decline, the long neglected infrastructure crumbles, the DOC budget continues to increase. It now stands at more than $1.5 billion annually. Lawsuits over unconstitutional conditions have cost taxpayers tens of millions more. We'll talk about that a little bit here in this series, talk about the budget, the decline in population in the Arizona Department of Corrections. I think our numbers as of today, which is December 12th, I believe our numbers are 33,600 men and women and some minors held in the Arizona Department of Corrections. That's actively being inside of our prisons. There's another 4,000 or 5,000 that are on community corrections or parole. Okay, continuing on. The men and women who live and work within our state prisons are routinely subject to disease, violence, inhumane conditions, and untimely death. In recent years, prisoners have escaped, suicide among prisoners has reached record highs, and record low staffing numbers have some facilities operating on the brink of collapse. While many of the challenges facing the department have existed for decades and plague other state prison systems, critics of the Arizona Department of Corrections point to its leader, Director David Shinn, for failing to make any progress in reforming the agency since he was appointed by Governor Doug Ducey more than 3 years ago. Ducey brought in Shinn as a change maker, but he was widely seen as merely a caretaker. State Representative Walt Blackman, a Republican from Snowflake, who was the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee from 2020 to 2022, said he initially gave Shinn the benefit of the doubt. And I can say that's true. I worked with Representative Blackman over a number of years, directly and indirectly, regarding oversight of the Arizona Department of Corrections. And I can say that Representative Blackman did give David Shinn the benefit of the doubt. And we'll get into that a little bit more about some predicates that Representative Blackman gave during a special kind of sunset review hearing that was conducted in the House and the Senate regarding the Department of Corrections. I wanted him to be able to lay down a plan and then give him time to implement it, Blackman said of Shinn. I actually suggested he should not take the position. This is important. I actually suggested he not take the position until he could do a comprehensive review of the department. But he didn't do that. He should have done that. Blackman said Shinn's failure to take stock of the agency's serious challenges left him unprepared to make changes. Three years later, Blackman said, Shinn doesn't have many accomplishments to point to. The work that was done was superficial and didn't really get to some of the main issues that are plaguing the department, Blackman said. So I think it's probably time for a new person in there. It's typical for governors to appoint new department heads when they take office. While Hobbs has not indicated that a new DOC director is imminent, campaign spokesperson Joe Wolf called the Department of Corrections an endless source of controversy that needs reform. And that is absolutely true. It's good to see somebody with the Hobbs administration making that statement publicly. The Hobbs administration will work with stakeholders and experts to investigate those issues, implement policy to ensure tax dollars are not wasted, and ensure that the public safety is prioritized, Wolf said. The Department of Corrections and its need for steady leadership is on our radar, and our administration will be looking at all options on the table to bring to that department. Again, a good, strong statement from Joe Wolf of the Hobbs administration, Hobbs campaign team. Ducey appointed Shinn in 2019, replacing former Director Charles Ryan, who we now know is under criminal investigation, is going through a criminal process relative to him having a standoff with police in Tempe and pointing guns at them, allegedly. So Ducey appointed Shinn in 2019, replacing former Director Charles Ryan, who announced his retirement shortly after whistleblower corrections officer Gabriela Contreras leaked surveillance video to the media showing that prison doors did not lock properly at the state prison in Lewis, allowing prisoners to assault staff and one another. At the time, Shinn had Ducey's full confidence. Our goal was to identify a leader with extensive experience in the corrections field, a record of solving problems and getting results, and a passion for public service, Ducey said in a statement at the time. David Shinn is that leader. I want to go back to this here real quick. Gabriela Contreras. So Gabriela Contreras was a sergeant, I believe, an officer at the Lewis complex who had gotten the video footage out and got it to ABC 15, Dave Biscabine, about what was going on. It was internal security footage. And she had gotten that out and gotten into Dave Biscabine showing that what was going on in Lewis with the locks. And the people could just open the locks. And that's, once you're in a prison, once you're in that setting, you probably need to have locking doors. And certainly there was a lot of security events that happened because of that. I believe one man actually was killed at Lewis during that period. So it was serious. About a year subsequent after Ms. Contreras released that film, she herself was found deceased. And the official narrative is, I believe, this needs to be checked, I believe the official narrative was that it was suicide, but that's always been questioned because what she did to bring the truth out of what was going on in the Department of Corrections cost the Charles Ryan his directorship, cost a lot of other people inside the Department of Corrections their jobs because they were completely incompetent and criminally negligent, in my view. So there was a lot of people that were upset regarding this revelation. And so there's always been some question regarding that. I do know that Gabriela Contreras was subject to a lot of staff retaliation and harassment, violating the thin brown line type thing in there. So truly tragic what happened with Ms. Contreras. And that's a big issue. All right, going back to the story. The department states its mission as providing safer communities by implementing court-imposed sentences and removing those who victimize our citizens to appropriately secured environments. In its 5-year plan, the department said it is committed to facilitating structured programming designed to develop inmates' personal responsibility for their successful reintegration to the community through rehabilitative opportunities for change. In its 5-year plan, it's 3 years into that 5-year plan, and none of that's really existing. The department claims it provides effective supervision when prisoners return to society, designed to result in improved reentry outcomes which reduce recidivism. Okay. The governor's office declined to comment on Shinn's performance and did not respond to questions regarding whether he had made any progress in rehabilitating incarcerated people or helping them return successfully to society. I can tell you, as somebody that was in the Department of Corrections and came out to society, it is a difficult process. Even when you got everything working for you, it's a difficult process. And we are not setting people up for success as they return from the Department of Corrections. We're not setting them up for success while they're in the Department of Corrections. Arizona, an attorney for the Arizona Corrections Peace Officer Association, that's one of the labor organizations that represents a number of correctional officer staff, a correctional union officer union, also declined to comment on Shinn's tenure or the prospect of a new director. Shinn did not respond to questions about his performance at the agency. The Department of Corrections communications team declined to respond to questions as well, other than to say ADCRR is proud of the tremendous work our officers and professional staff do each day to keep our communities safe. All right, let me get a drink here. Mired in legal challenges. 2 years after his appointment as director of the Arizona Department of Corrections, David Shinn found himself testifying in the federal court in defense of the state agency. When he took over, Shinn inherited an ongoing prison health care settlement and became the new main named defendant in the underlying suit. Originally, it was filed as a class action suit regarding the provision of health care, the provision of mental health care, the overuse of solitary confinement, and I believe also veterans care was initially in this class action suit. It was initially filed as Parsons versus Ryan, and subsequently that was filed in 2012. That's a long storied history. We'll talk about that in a separate video. But the initial plaintiff, Mr. Parsons, he passed away during the pendency of the lawsuit. And then, of course, Charles Ryan left as being the director. And so when David Shinn came in, he became the new primary defendant in the case. And so it was renamed from Parsons versus Ryan to Jensen versus Shinn. All right. In 2012, the federal court recognized a group of people in Arizona prisons who claimed their Eighth Amendment rights against cruel and unusual punishment were being violated. The class action lawsuit was then named Parsons versus Ryan after named plaintiff Victor Parsons and then Director Charles Ryan. Arizona agreed to settle the case in 2014, and it was approved by a judge the next year. That is an important fact. It was the state of Arizona that sought the settlement agreement with the plaintiff class that ultimately was reached in 2014 and was approved by then, I believe it was United States District Court Judge Duncan, I believe, approved that one. But since that time, the federal courts overseeing the settlement have ruled the state was not living up to the terms of the settlement agreement. Federal judges have twice held the department in contempt, including a $1.1 million fine during Shinn's tenure in 2021. The earlier contempt fine was even higher. It was $1.3 million, and that was still under the director, that was under Charles Ryan's directorship. And then again, they were found in contempt because they just absolutely refused to comply with the terms of the settlement agreement that they sought from the plaintiff class. So the total amount of just contempt fines in this matter were $2.4 million, I believe. It was 2.3 or 2.4. The case outlasted judges, named plaintiffs, and prison administrators. It's now known as Jensen Shinn, which I just detailed a minute ago. In July 2021, the U.S. District Court Judge Roslyn took the drastic measure of rescinding the settlement and ordering a bench trial, which began on November 1st. The United States District Court, was so frustrated with the recalcitrant, the non-compliance of the Arizona Department of Corrections that this was a historic and rarely done drastic measure of rescinding the settlement agreement and forcing the parties to actually go through the trial. That was after years of directions from the court, noncompliance, and then, of course, the contempt fines that I have discussed already. At trial, Shinn testified that running the Arizona prison system was by far one of the most challenging assignments I have ever had in a professional career that began as a corrections officer in 1991 and included serving as an auditor in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as well as a warden of a federal prison. But Shinn said he had a tremendous willingness to achieve success and make the lives of the men and women in our custody better. He did the exact opposite. All right, David Fathi, an attorney for the ACLU's National Prison Project, has litigated the Parsons case for a decade and frequently visits Arizona prisons. David Fathi has been at the ACLU National Prison Project for a long time. He was there, and I believe he left for a while, and then he came back again in the 90s and 2000s. He was lead counsel on at the trial, on the Shinn trial. He's a brilliant man, and he understands the Arizona Department of Corrections really well. And Corrine Kendrick, also from the ACLU, was counsel on that. It was a great team, but I think those two were the lead attorneys on it. So David Fathi is going to give a comment here. He said, while conditions were bad under former Director Ryan, he has seen no meaningful changes during Shinn's tenure. Quote, we continue to run up against this blank wall of denial and obstruction and a lack of any interest in working collaboratively to actually fix the system, Fathi said. When the system is this dysfunctional, it's typical for the director to acknowledge that there are problems. He may play down their seriousness, he may claim they're already being remedied, but he doesn't deny their existence. Not so with Shinn. Fathi, who cross-examined Shinn at the Parsons trial, says the director's own testimony showed he either fails or refuses to accept the dangerous state of healthcare in the state prisons. Despite years of failing to live up to court-ordered standards, repeated court sanctions totaling millions of dollars, and weeks of testimony from prisoners to the contrary, Shinn told the court he thought highly of Arizona's prisoners' healthcare system. They, quote, this was a David Shinn quote, they often have greater access to care than I do as a private citizen, he said of people incarcerated in the Arizona state prisons. It's just inconceivable that anyone who's paying any attention to this case could actually believe that, Fathi said. Judge Silver called Shinn's testimony, quote, shocking. In a scathing ruling that found that the healthcare system and conditions of confinement unconstitutional, Judge Silver repeatedly condemned Shinn and his leadership. The claim that, this is a quote from the United States District Court Judge Roslyn Silver, the claim that prisoners' access to care exceeds the access to care enjoyed by people in the community is completely detached from reality, Silver wrote. Given the overwhelming evidence and repeated instances of insufficient care leading to suffering and death, defendant Shinn could not possibly believe prisoners have the same access to care as people in the community. He is either, as the judge said here, completely detached from reality or intentionally obtuse in this. And I think we know what it is. It's intent. Silver called Shinn's testimony a blatant admission of his flagrant dereliction of responsibilities as a director of the Arizona prison system. Let's go over that again. This is the United States District Judge, Roslyn Silver, who is a senior judge on the United States on the federal bench, called Shinn's testimony. Let's go over that one more time. A blatant admission of his flagrant dereliction of responsibilities as the director of the Arizona prison system. Away from the Parsons case, Shinn created entirely new legal problems through a series of policy changes. The Department of Corrections violated the law and its own policies by denying the Republic access to serve as the media witnesses for executions and for failing to allow other witnesses who were granted access to see the entirety of the execution, according to a demand letter from the Republic sent in May 2022. This is a case. This is a big case. Jimmy Jenkins, on 3 different executions, requested to be a media witness. The Arizona Republic, of course, the paper of record in Arizona. It was remarkable that Director Shinn refused to allow the paper of record of Arizona in to be a witness on the executions. In January 2022, the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of a man incarcerated in an Arizona prison who claimed the Department of Corrections media policy, updated under Shinn, discriminates against Black artists. Another incarcerated man was successful in a complaint against the Arizona Department of Corrections filed in 2021, saying the agency was wrongly interpreting state law, potentially denying people incarcerated in state prisons the opportunity to earn time off their sentences. Again, keeping people in prison longer than they were supposed to, already in one of the most draconian sentencing states in the country. Shinn's Corrections Department also came under fire for spending more than $24 million on a flawed computer system that was unable to calculate updates to sentencing laws, again keeping people in prison for longer than necessary. Those last 2 were 2 independent, autonomous issues that Director Shinn had manifested through his policy changes, where he was keeping people in prison longer than they should have been there. And Arizona is one of the worst states already. We already have truth in sentencing where you do 85% of your time, where there's only 3 states in the country that operate under that model. It's the most draconian in the system, and this guy came in and made it worse. Jewish inmates sued Director Shinn after Director Shinn switched the kosher meal from a plant-based common fare meal. Let me restate that. Jewish inmates sued after Director Shinn switched from a kosher meal to a plant-based common fare meal in August of 2020 at all state-run prisons. The American Civil Liberties Union said this Arizona Department of Corrections is violating the First Amendment by stopping issues of The Nation magazine from reaching incarcerated subscribers, according to a demand letter sent to prison officials in July of 2022. Security risks and infrastructure problems. Security issues have plagued the Department of Corrections under Shinn's leadership. 2 incarcerated men escaped from the prison in Florence in January and remained on the loose for nearly 5 days. Records show that the prison was understaffed at the time of the escapes. Staffing has been a continuing problem during Shinn's administration. Let's talk about this escape for a second. You can go to the ATAC website. There is a number of stories in the news section where I detailed in real time as the escape had happened and in the immediate aftermath, where I detailed how problematic it was of the official narrative that was coming out of the Department of Corrections. It didn't make any sense to anybody that's ever spent 5 minutes inside of our prisons. None of it made sense. And then eventually, as the truth came out, there was a video that was filmed of the captain of South Unit where this escape occurred, as he walked and showed how these two gentlemen were able to break into a tool shed, steal tools that were not secured properly according to policy, and then use those tools to cut through not one, not two, not three, not five, not seven, but 10 fences. 10 fences. Let's do that one more time. 10 fences, all that were monitored by cameras that can read a Coke can from a quarter mile away, with motion detectors and seismic detectors on security fences. And when these gentlemen got outside, they were in their prison clothing that they put paint on and walked off the complex, that Florence complex, without being detected, and just walked down Florence Road, which is a prison town, and just were walking around the town of Florence and Eloy for several days. And they did assault a gentleman, I believe it was a gentleman and a woman in Eloy. This was an unbelievable, embarrassing security gaffe at South Unit. So yeah, pretty bad. When he was appointed in the fall of 2019, there were 1,136 correction officer vacancies. In March of 2020, Shinn told the state legislature COVID-19 could actually not have been a better recruiting tool for us than right now. We have no problem hiring folks. He was under the gun on COVID protocols. He was under the gun on the way he had done his gaffe regarding masks and staff. And he was under a lot of pressure from the legislature and out here to talk about the staffing issues. So he came and basically, this seems pretty disingenuous. 2 years later, in July of 2022, Shinn reported to state lawmakers that the number of officer vacancies had increased by 66% under his leadership to 1891. He came in, changed a bunch of policies, made everything intolerable for the incarcerated and the staff. Looks like he fibbed to the Arizona legislature, like he fibbed in court about his access to health care related to the incarcerated's access to health care, and increased the staff attrition rate by 66%. This is why we are in a critical state in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Shinn is the great exacerbator. Chronically low staffing was one of the issues cited by the whistleblowers who told the Arizona Republic in August that the Lewis prison was on the brink of collapse. That was a remarkable piece, and I challenge you to go out and find that piece by Jimmy Jenkins, again in the Arizona Republic, where staff whistleblowers at the Lewis complex. Now, Lewis complex is the largest prison that we have in Arizona. It's the most recent prison we have in Arizona, a state prison that we have in Arizona, recently built. It was built primarily in the 90s, went live in the 90s and 2000s. It's housing somewhere around 5,000 men there, all levels of custody. So it's minimum, medium, close, and maximum custody there. They have the security threat group, RAST max unit, security threat group step down unit there. So this is definitely not the place where we want a complete and total systemic failure. And we had staff whistleblowers who came out and put their careers and their lives, I believe, in jeopardy by being a whistleblower, came out and said it's on the brink of collapse. I'm going to have another video and a story where I'm going to talk about where I went back to visit in Lewis Complex about 1 year ago and the things that I saw there that sent shivers up my spine and just made me extraordinarily concerned about what's going on in the Department of Corrections. Shocked my conscience what I saw. All right. So the officer said they came forward. Okay, chronically low staffing was one of the issues that's cited by the whistleblowers. Yes, the officer said they came forward because they wanted the public to know about the conditions at the prison are leading to an unsafe working environment that is causing their colleagues to quit and contributing to the deaths of prisoners. A prisoner at Lewis State Prison in Buckeye alleged in a civil trial in September that the warden had ordered inmate-on-inmate discipline, resulting in hundreds of beatings. Prisoners and correction officials testified at the trial that the lock issues remain unsolved despite millions spent on replacement system, and incarcerated people are still able to leave their cells as often as they please. Reports conducted by DOC and the Arizona Department of Health Services in 2020 documented rampant pest infestation, broken equipment, and frequent use of expired food in state prison kitchens. Dangerous and unsanitary conditions in the prisons under Shinn's watch have led to a riot and a hunger strike. I think there was more than one riot, actually. William Jordan, incarcerated at the state prison in Douglas, says conditions have worsened during Shinn's tenure. Jordan and Shinn implemented a new security restriction. Jordan said Shinn implemented new security restrictions that resulted in prisoners, including him, being consistently locked down for 22 hours a day. Staff members from the bottom of the top to central office have no form of accountability and have no regard for policy, Jordan said. Shinn basically has no knowledge of the inner workings of the prisons he is in charge of. The information he receives from wardens and deputy wardens who want him to think that everything is running smoothly. That's exactly what is detailed in the report that the two former Supreme Court justices did on the Lewis Locke investigation that Governor Ducey had commissioned in 2019. Go read that report. It'll be available on the ATAC website. Go read that report. Look and see what was causal there. Again, it's that same thing. Shinn came in and made things exponentially worse. He's the great exacerbator. Shinn's critics say his poor leadership only exacerbated systemic problems during an already challenging time. I'm sorry, I did not read that prior to making that statement. Arizona prisons faced unprecedented challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, but Shinn's decisions early on were criticized by prisoners and employees alike. In April of 2020, with not cases yet confirmed, Shinn told lawmakers he believed Arizona prisons were some of the safest places to live. 2 years later, the department had recorded more than 70 prisoner deaths from COVID, nearly 15,000 infections among incarcerated people, and more than 5,000 staff members self-reported COVID infections. Despite recommendations to reduce prison populations to prevent the spread of COVID, Governor Doug Ducey and Director Shinn refused to release prisoners from state custody. After backtracking on an initial mask ban, Shinn mandated mask wearing by staff while failing to provide masks for prisoners. The department used prison labor to make masks for staff, cloth masks that don't work for staff, but did not have access to masks for their own protection. While most prisoners' work programs were suspended during the pandemic, Shinn implemented a plan to house 140 female prisoners on site at the Hickman's Egg Ranch. Incarcerated women said that they were forced to forego GED classes and other programs to work during the pandemic at the ranch. So when push came to shove, what this is saying right here is when we had the pandemic and push came to shove, what prevailed? Was it the slave labor corporate labor giveaway to Hickman Farms that was more important, or was it the education and rehabilitation of these women that were more important? And when push came to shove, they took away all the rehabilitation, education, and access to treatment and put those women out and made them live on the job site at Hickman's Farms, I believe in tents. I might be wrong about that, but it might have been some other structures, but made them live on the job and work on the chicken farm instead of getting an education and rehabilitation. The director came under fire again in July after saying Arizona communities would collapse without cheap prison labor during testimony at the state legislature. An investigation by the Arizona Republic found Arizona Correction Industries, a state-run company that sells prison labor and prison-made products, made millions of dollars in profits annually while failing to deliver on promises of skill training and rehabilitation. Absolutely. We'll get into that whole morass in a different video. Shinn drastically altered department media policies upon taking office. This is what he did right off the bat. The first things that Shinn did after the Lewis Locke thing, after Gabby Contreras came out and revealed what was going on and got that tape out so that the public and lawmakers could see what really was going in the Department of Corrections instead of hearing the lies of the directors, Ryan and Shinn. So what did he do? Instead of go to solve that problem, he closed the curtains. This is how he did it. Shinn drastically altered department media policies upon taking office, stopping press phone interviews with prisoners and prohibiting staff from speaking to the media. Let's go over that again. Prohibiting staff from speaking to the media. Director Shinn passed a policy which removed the free speech rights of staff to speak to the press. That was his first step. That's when we knew we were in trouble with Shinn. When his first acts weren't to remediate the problems, but to close the curtains and make the department more opaque, we knew we were in trouble. Shinn did not hold a press conference during his tenure and declined repeated requests from the Republic for in-person or phone interviews. And as a matter of fact, he got COVID when he was doing all of this stuff and saying that Arizona prisons were the safest place in the world to live while 70 people were dying and 15,000 were getting infected. There was a deputy warden, I believe it was either a deputy warden or complex warden in Yuma, got COVID during that time and died. And Shinn got COVID during the escape we were talking about before, and his deputy director had to do all the press conferences from Florence on that because he was out with COVID while he was saying it was the safest place to be. Anyways, all right. He never hold any press conferences, but he did hold go on KTAR and talk to Broomhead and which is very favorable conservative media here in Arizona. This is where your conservatives like to go talk because they're not going to have to answer a lot of difficult questions, although I think that they did ask him some questions, which Shinn was able to just kind of brush away. Here, Jimmy is quoting me. I was quoted in this. He did reach out to me as ED of ATAC. He says here, this is my quote, John Fabricius, Executive Director of Arizona's for Transparency and Accountability and Corrections, said a new director is necessary to reestablish competent and secure operations in the prisons. Quote, the director has near unilateral control over DOC, Fabricius said, and as we have seen with the Ryan and Shinn administrations, the level of dysfunction inside DOC is manifested in a continued threat to the safety of the human beings who are incarcerated in DOC and the staff who work there. That's true. It's demonstrably true. I also said that Shinn had used his powers to shut down any attempts at transparency, which we were just discussing. Representative Walt Blackman echoed that sentiment, saying that Shinn and Ducey administrations had pushed back on his efforts to establish in state law an independent oversight committee with the Department of Corrections. This is exactly right. This is what ATAC families, FAM, the National FAM, and ATAC, myself, and our team did work with Representative Blackman in a number of years, the last 3 years, to sponsor legislation to create independent external oversight of the Department of Corrections, which also creates an Office of Correctional Ombuds and a legislative committee, which is different and unique on many of the models throughout the country, so that we don't have the governor undermining the office of the independent ombudsman, because the prisons are an executive, meaning they're a agency of the governor. And so reports that come out about bad reports about it are embarrassing to the governor. And so oftentimes what we've seen throughout the country is that we get an oversight ombudsman established, which is part of the executive branch of government. And then the governor, once they see the scathing reports that come out about the prisons, they don't want that publicly embarrassment, so they'll undermine the office of the ombudsman. Our model that we've put out there also creates a legislative committee, so these reports from the ombudsman don't just go to the director, or to the governor. They also go to the legislative committee, and they have control over who the ombudsman is and funding and all those type of things to secure it, so that we can have transparency and accountability and using the checks and balances of both branches of government over each other on this issue. So that's what makes that's the legislation that's being referenced here. So Blackman, who unsuccessfully ran for Congress this year, says he hopes another lawmaker will pick up the oversight legislation back in the upcoming session. We are dumping billions of dollars into a system that is not checked, said Representative Blackman. There's no checks and balances. There's no transparency. It's a broken system, and we're continuing to push money down there, Blackman said. The oversight legislation would have gotten our hands around the problem. That is absolutely true. Blackman said he hopes the Hobbs administration team will take a holistic approach to reforming the department. And I believe that that is important as well. To really turn that, quote, to really turn that system around, you have to do more than just get a new director, because they'll face the same thing as Shinn, Blackman said. So the new administration has to give the new director flexibility to really clean house and run a comprehensive review of that prison system. Absolutely true. He's spot on right there. Going back to me, Fabricius said the department needs independent oversight regardless of who runs it. This is absolutely true. We should never trust an agency to monitor themselves, because there is always an inherent conflict of interests. I said, that's exactly right. You can't you can't have the watchers watching themselves. Somebody else has got to watch the watchers, right? And there has to be some sort of independent review. Anytime you have an agency whose director serves at the pleasure of the governor, who has bad information and is going to embarrass the governor, what do you think that person whose job depends on that bad information not getting to the governor is going to do? Molly Gill, who has worked with us extensively here in Arizona, and has led nationally on prison oversight. They have a national bill on oversight right now for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and has led in a number of states on this. FAM has done really well on oversight and getting the issue of the need for prison oversight out there throughout the country. So I have the highest respect for Molly Gill. And Molly Gill, president of vice president of policy at FAM, a nonpartisan, nonprofit sentencing reform organization in Washington, D.C., agreed that new leadership would not solve everything. Quote, I think independent oversight will allow for a constant eye on this troubled system and hopefully come up with some solutions to fix things like the understaffing and the overcrowding of the infrastructure problems. Molly Gill said, it's not just about addressing poor leadership, it's about addressing past problems, but also preventing future problems. Gill said the whole concept behind oversight is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's absolutely true. If oversight can catch these problems before they turn into lawsuits, before they turn into riots, then oversight is doing its job, and it's well worth the time and money that we would put into it, Molly Gill said. So this is the report that was put out Friday by Jimmy Jenkins, and it is extraordinarily important, and it is the case against David Shinn. So what we can say is that David Shinn came in after Charles Ryan's debacle relative to the Lewis Lock, and that's just the part. The Lewis Lock issue is just the part of the iceberg that we can see above the water. This problems underneath the water inside the Arizona Department of Correction are legion. The Arizona Department of Corrections has complexes strewn throughout the state, right? They're in Douglas, they're in Yuma, they're in Kingman, they're in Florence, they're in Safford and Winslow, and these, even the Safford complex, Fort Grant is, far away, or up in Apache County. We've got prisons that are separated out from the Winslow complex up there. They're strewn out throughout the four corners of the state, in these rural areas, and the central office is here in Phoenix. So what we have is these fiefdoms all throughout the state where the complex warden and then the unit deputy wardens are running these facilities, and the the director of the Department of Corrections sits here in Phoenix, and he is not seeing what's going on. He or she will not see what's going on with visits. They know the director's coming. They do the same thing when the director's coming that they do when the press is coming, which is they put on a dog and pony for the director, right? All of a sudden, everything gets cleaned up 3 days before the director arrives to inspect a unit. The deputy warden and the captains are out telling everybody they're going to, do every kind of heinous possible thing they can within the disciplinary system to everybody and take everything they got if they don't act right when the director comes through. This is the common playbook, right? And so what we have to have is a system of independent, external oversight of the Department of Corrections. And our legislation that we support, that we promote, has that in there. It's got mechanisms so that staff can speak with confidentiality to the ombudsman. The people that are men and women that are incarcerated in the Department of Corrections can have confidential, private conversations with the ombudsman, and we can get to the issues of what's really going on. Because what we've seen in this story is that the director will come out and lie to us. They will lie to the public, lie to the governor, lie to the legislature with impunity. They'll just come out and lie and say things are great and that the access to healthcare is better. But then when you actually go into the Department of Corrections and you see what they're doing, that they're standing at a cell and just shooting pepper spray balls one after another to some poor guy that's having a mental health crisis, when you see how they murder people through their negligence and deliberate indifference to their medical conditions, when you see this, then you see how much we're being lied to by the administration, whose jobs depend on this rosy presentation of the operations of the Department of Corrections. We must have independent oversight. This is the most crucial department where we have at home. Long-term care homes, elderly care homes, and prisons. These are custodial environments where the state is taking over the custody and care of human beings. Now, we know in this popular thought that it's great if we just send people in there and we send them into these lawless islands of brutality and let them get raped and let them get beaten and feel bad and horrible, that somehow when the 96% of people that come out of the Department of Corrections are somehow going to come out being better citizens after being traumatized, brutalized, and disregarded for whatever period of time, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. If we think that that model is going to bring out people that are more ready to buy into society, more ready to buy into authority, and to contribute to our communities, then we're operating in a fantasy land. You don't create more civic engagement by brutally treating people. That doesn't make them want to buy into the system. We must fix our prisons. It's not okay to say they got what they got coming because they broke the law. They broke the law. Well, there's still a set of laws related to prisons. And that's in our Constitution. The 8th Amendment of the Constitution, no cruel and unusual punishment, due process of law. First Amendment rights on speech. We need to make sure that the people in our custody are taken care of, that they are given every opportunity to turn their lives around, to rehabilitate, to take advantage of treatment opportunities, of education opportunities, of rehabilitation, therapeutic programming opportunities. That's what we have to do. We're spending $1.5 billion to train people, to send people. This is the biggest, our money right now, as it is right now, is just a big scholarship fund. This $1.5 billion that we are spending on our prisons is a big, giant scholarship fund. It's free scholarship to Crime University, right? It's you get in there and you're going into Crime University, and the way that the Department of Corrections is now under truth and sentencing, there is no motivation to turn your life around. We're stacking people in there like my friend Pat Nolan says, stacking them in there like cordwood. We're not giving them any treatment. It's only reaching 2% of the population. Treatment opportunities are only reaching 2% of the people. 78% have a high need for substance abuse treatment. It's only getting to 2% because we're spending all of this money to actually just send them out to work crews. We're just funding work crews. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing with our incarcerated. We're just funding work crews. It's just a human slave labor process right now. That's all we're doing. We're not, and the recidivism rates show this. We've got to change our Department of Corrections. We have to treat people. We have to get them. We have to understand that the short-term benefits that we have to the community with sending people out there to do this free labor for corporations like Hickman's Farms, right? This low-paid wage. That is beneficial to a particular end, but it should not be the entirety of the program that's in the Department of Corrections. Yes, the work part is great. Being able to earn some real money while you're in the Department of Corrections is great. Those opportunities should exist, but they should not be the only thing that's going on in the Department of Corrections. We still have to get people education. We still have to get them access to treatment, therapeutic treatments, substance abuse treatments, and the other things. And we're failing at that. And the recidivism rate shows this, and so does the internal operations of the Department of Corrections. I will go in through on a different video talking about what I saw there when I went back in and the just absolute critically low state of our security in the Department of Corrections. It's time that we do better. The governor now has a choice. Governor-elect Hobbs has a choice. She can make this Department of Corrections a priority, or she's going to disregard it or focus on other priorities, which are important. Listen, being a governor is a difficult thing, and there's a lot of things that we have to take care of in our society. However, the Arizona Department of Corrections is in the most critical state it has ever been in. It's in bad shape. And if we do not prioritize this, if we do not put the efforts and energy in to getting independent oversight of this Department of Corrections, start getting the truth out and start fixing this department, then this issue is going to consume our state. People are dying. People are living in abject horror and misery. And just remember, if you're telling yourself, well, good, that's what they got coming, just remember, 96% of the people that go into the Department of Corrections come home. They come home. So do you want somebody that's going to move in next door to you that the state just brutalized for 5 years? Or do you want somebody that was able to access treatment, rehabilitative processes, education, and come out and is ready to go back into society and engage? You don't have a choice on whether or not they come out. You don't have a choice on whether or not they move in next door. These are people's families. These are brothers and sisters and mothers and daughters, and these are human beings that need an opportunity. Everybody falls down. Let's help them stand upright. Thank you.